I went up to the second floor and in this building, and it was a headquarters building, and there was several officers there, and they wanted to interrogate me, and and then they searched me, and they took everything out of my flight suit, all of my plastic packages of medicine and emergency food and everything, and of course I had some money, and they took the money and all, and then of course they wanted to ask me questions, and I told them my name, rank, and serial number, and I wouldn't tell them anything else, because it's my understanding that's all we had to say to them. And they got mad and said okay, and one of them took me downstairs and across the parking lot to another building, and the front of it was an office, and this guy was a sergeant that took me over there, and that was his office. No, the guy that took me over there wasn't the sergeant that was there in that office, because when I got there and we went in the office, he was on the telephone and somebody was just screaming at him. You could hear the guy on the phone without even having the phone to your ear. And evidently they told him that in the stuff they took from me, they didn't find a watch. And they told him to look for the watch. And then he said okay, and he had me hold my arms out, and he knew he felt this arm, and he felt this arm. He knew you wore a wrist. He went back on the phone and told them they hadn't have him watch. And they screamed at him again, and he come back and checked again. This time he peeled the cuff back a little bit and looked. He went back and told them, I just simply didn't have a watch. Well, I had a watch, and it was there. But Marion had just sent me a stretch band for this GI watch from my birthday, and I had taken the little canvas strap off of the GI watch and put the stretch band on, and in landing, the shock of it pushed it up my arm just enough where that cuff, where it touched the jacket, where it was thick and you couldn't feel the watch. But you peel it back and you can peel back far enough to see the watch. And I knew what he's looking for. I didn't say anything. I just acted like I didn't know what he was doing. And when he finally convinced him that I didn't have a watch, well, then he took me through a door to the office, and I realized that now I was in the jail, and took me down the hall to the left, and the first door on the right, he stopped and opened it, and in there. And when I looked at that door as he opened it, that sucker was 2 to 3 inches thick, solid wood. But later I also noticed, I found out that on the outside of it, it had a little metal round thing, a swinging thing they could pull up to one side and look through a peephole and look at you. And the peephole was about as big as a nickel, I guess. And in the room, just inside the door on the left, was a little wooden table and a wooden chair. And on the right, it was just a long room, and on the right was a wooden bench bunk, and the head part of the bench was sloped slightly. And on that bunk was a croaker sack mattress filled with corn shucks. and of course that didn't give you much protection from the wood, but we were young and tough, and I didn't care. And then later on, why, they brought in supper, and you had to stand back from the door while they brought it in and put it on the little table at the door. And it was a bowl of their favorite food for prisoners, it was potato peeling soup. They peeled the potatoes, the Irish potatoes, and they ate the potatoes and cooked the peelings for prisoners. And it was a piece of German black bread. And then after supper, why, the door opened again, and in come this little German lieutenant. He's a real small guy, and a little non-com with him. And the non-com had a notepad in his hand. And of course, when they entered the room, why, it was click your heels and Heil Hitler and raise your arm again, you know. And of course, I just looked at them, well, you jerks. and I was sitting on the bunk. I didn't even get up. I was mad, still mad. And of course, I hadn't had anything for that headache or anything else except those 2 aspirin, because they took the aspirin and everything else away from me. And when I got to the field at the headquarters, and the little officer started interrogating me. You know, again he wanted to know what my outfit was and where I come from and what my mission was. And I thought, well, you jerks, by now you've got the airplane, and I know it didn't burn because I saw it before I left that area and the fire had gone out. And the maps and everything were in it with lines from England and where we were going and everything else. Now, there wasn't any other than just the maps with lines on it, but hey, they could read the maps. And I wouldn't talk to him. And I finally gave him my name, rank, and serial number, and I wouldn't say anything else. And before he came in, someone brought a couple of blankets, thin blankets. And I used one of them later for a cover for that corn sack, and then the other one I put on top of me. And then when it got cold later on, I got under both of them. But he got so mad because I wouldn't talk to him, and he finally, I thought he was going to pull his pistol out and shoot me. I thought, you pull that pistol, you better darn sure be fast, because I tell you, I was young and mean then, and I could move. Even though I'd been whacked in the face, I could still move. And he never reached for the pistol, but he got so fierce, he finally clicked his heels and Heil Hitler and made an about face, a military about face, and stormed out of the cell, and they closed the door. And that was the last I heard of them. And the next morning, for breakfast, why, they gave you a bowl of it wasn't cream of wheat, but it was some kind of grain like that, a cereal. And they gave you 2 pieces of this loaf of German black bread, 2 slices, and they gave you a little slice of oleo. But I don't know if you've ever seen it or not, but this was like the little quarters of oleo that we get now wrapped, but then, why, it was white. It looked like lard, and you had to mix a powder in it to make the color, but they didn't give you any coloring. It just looked like a pat of lard, but it wasn't. It didn't taste like lard. It was oleo. And I don't know how I realized, but I didn't eat both pieces of bread for breakfast because they didn't give you one. They only gave you 2 meals a day, that and generally potato peeling soup or beets or something for supper. And if you saved 1 piece of bread, you'd have that for supper. And besides that, the loaf of bread was burned. The outer crust was really black. And so being used to having steak and eggs at 3 o'clock in the morning if I wanted them, back at the 4th Fighter Group. And you could even go down to the mess, and a senior master sergeant would cook them for you, or you could cook them yourself if you wanted to. And I just ate the center of the bread. But I realized that I better not leave those crusts on the table or with the dish. So I took the crust and went over, and the extra piece in the morning, and went over and lifted that croaker sack mattress and stuck them under there on that wood of the bed. Well, I was there about a week, but before that week was up, I tell you, I got so hungry from that diet that they furnished. I went back, and a few at a time I got those crusts, and they tasted like chocolate cake. One day, after I was there a couple of days, they opened the cell door, and this big sergeant, he looked like later Sergeant Schultz on Hogan's Heroes on TV. Great big guy like that. He's a nice guy. And he said, you want to go out and exercise? And of course, this was just a cell about 20 or 25 feet long and about 10 or 12 feet wide, and one window way up high on the wall, it was bars, and the glass in the window was all laying on the floor because some guy had strafed that outfit there. Maybe it was us, and blew all the grass out the windows.
That was a pretty big cell then, huh?
Oh yeah, and so I said yes. So he told me to come on out the door of the cell. We walked back toward the office and turned to the left and stood to the right of the office, and he opened another door, and we were in the courtyard again. And this was a pretty good sized courtyard. I guess it was maybe 30 or 35 yards square, and the building was built all around it. And so he told me that motioned me I could walk around the courtyard. And so I walked around the outside of it, and it felt good to walk because, hey, I hadn't had a chance to walk for several days. And I walked around, and finally on one turn around, he said, motioned me to come back in. And I went back in, he put me back in the cell and locked the door. And so I thought, I wonder who else is here. And the chair wasn't tall enough, but that table wasn't very big, and I went over and moved the chair, grabbed that table, and pushed it to the other end of the cell under that window, and jumped up on that table, and I could look out the window, down into the courtyard. And the next guy out there walking around, I couldn't believe it, was Colonel Woods, and he was the deputy group commander that flew with our squadron on that mission, and I was his wingman, and the squadron commander had told me, now Ben, Woods hadn't been on many of these missions, and I want you to stay with him now. Don't lose him, stay with him. I don't think he really meant for me to stay with him that far.
Oh no.
But then I yelled at him, I said, hey, Colonel Woods, and he looked up and he waved at me, and somebody else down the cell block heard me, and the next thing you know, there's a whole bunch of guys hollering at him, you know. And they were all laughing and everything, and next thing you know, sergeant in charge, he come down the cell block and told all of us we didn't shut up, there wasn't anybody else going to get any exercise, period, and they all had to shut up. And Woods came in, and one by one they took them out and let them walk around that courtyard. Another day, this big sergeant, that looked like Sergeant Schultz, he come and asked me if I wanted to go for exercise again. I said, sure. And so we went out through the office this time and out the front door, and we didn't go in the courtyard, and we started walking down the sidewalk. And we walked down the sidewalk for a couple of blocks, and I looked over to the right, and the sidewalk made a kind of a 90-degree turn, and there was a flight line. And brand new ME-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s and everything was sitting there wingtip to wingtip within 20 yards of me. And stopped, and I was looking at him, and I looked at him and I said, I want to go look at the airplanes. He says, he shook his head, he said, "It's verboten." I said, I'm not going to do anything, I just want to look at them. I'd like to sit in one of them and see what it looks like inside. If he'd ever let me sit in that airplane, he'd had to kill me. Because if I could have started it, had any fuel in it at all, I could have started it. Why, I'd have been taxied out of there. But he told me again very firmly, "Es verboten." No, Rausch. So we had to walk on down the sidewalk, and we walked around a couple of blocks and back to the other way, back to the building, and went in back through the office and back to my cell. Another day, it was in the morning again, about, I don't know, 9 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock, and boy, we could hear this machine gun fire. Man, I mean, it was really making a noise. I run and looked at the window, and there was a big dogfight going on right up in the air, right over and where we could see it. I quick pushed the table to the window and jumped up on it and looked at it. And boy, I mean, P-51s and ME-109s were really going at it, round and round and round. The next day, one of the P-51 pilots ended up in the cell block. He got shot down in that dogfight. Now, I don't know how many 109s they shot down, but it wasn't our outfit, it was another outfit. But the days went by, and then they announced, they told us at supper one night that in the morning we'd be leaving. And so early in the morning before daylight, I don't know what time it was. Now, I had my watch, but I was very careful when I looked at it. And I kept it wound up because it wasn't electric. You had to wind it. And also I had a package of Dentine chewing gum in the inside pocket of my flight suit, my flight jacket, that they didn't find. And I used that very sparingly and didn't chew it while one of them was looking at me, while the German guards were looking at me. But then the next morning before daylight, they gave each of us a paper bag, and that was our lunch. And they emptied the whole cell block, and there was 6 of us, including that guy that got shot down. And all the others were from the 4th Fighter Group. Got shot down on that strafing. Yeah, I knew them all, including Colonel Woods. And they took us on a truck and took us to a train station and put us on the train. And this prison camp that I thought and saw before I got down in it, and was looking up from what I looked down from the air that I told you about before, turned out to be the same place. And I looked up, and here's these P-51s flying over, and I said, I hope they don't think this is a German barracks. And started strafing us. And, but they didn't. And anyway, they put us on this train before daylight, and we had 3 guards with us. And these were regular Army. They weren't home guard, but they were young. One of them was 15, one was 16, and one was 17. Now, we were young, but we weren't that young. We were in our 20s. And one of them, 2 of them had pistols, and one of them had a submachine gun. And that sucker was brand new. and it wasn't very long. It was about 4 feet long. Had a air cool with round holes about as big as a quarter, metal jacket over the barrel, and the stock was wood, and it was varnished, and it looked like first class work, you know. And a sling on it to carry it over his shoulder. And so we were on this train, and we were in the caboose. It was really the caboose originally on the train, but they had looked like they had taken church pews and put them in the caboose. And there was, on one side, looking toward the engine on the right, there was a short pew, and the guards sat over there. And the other side, there was a longer pew, but the pews faced each other, and the 6 of us, 3 sat on one side, 3 on the other, facing each other. And there was in the front, toward the engine, in the front part of this caboose was German soldiers. We were the only prisoners on it, German soldiers. And one of them had a little concertina. You know, it's a little round thing that you play like an accordion. Mm-hmm. And we found out, well, our young guards, we could talk to them because, of course, we knew we could speak English. We knew some Spanish and some German. And they could speak German, and they knew some Spanish and English. And between all 3 languages, some way or another, we could understand each other. And they told us that this guy playing the concertina and singing his sad songs was a Russian that lived in Germany, and he got conscripted into the German army, and they were sending him to the front, and he knew he was going to die, and he was singing these dirges, these death songs, you know. And he played that thing and sang and sang. And
3 guards and this Russian guy?
No, just the Russian guy.
Okay.
And there was other soldiers with him.
Okay.
But only one of them was playing this and singing. And he didn't sing all the time, but he sang quite a bit. And we got to know him fairly well on there, and these guys, they all smoked, but me, all 5 of them smoked. And of course, the first day we ate all of our lunch. I mean, hey, we were hungry. Like I told you, that before I left there, why, that black burnt crust tasted like chocolate cake. And of course, we ate our lunch all at one time the first day, and our guards had food stamps, prisoner food stamps. And that they were, when the train stopped at a railroad yard, where they were to go to the German food store, the food stamps, and with the food stamps, and bring back food for us. Now they had little lunch boxes that their mothers had fixed for them, and they had each had a little loaf of black bread their mother had made, and they had some of that white oleo, a stick of that, and they had a little knife in there, and they had a little chunk of salt pork, not cooked now, not smoked, just salt pork. And when they got ready to eat, why, they took the little box out and laid the salt pork on it and sliced off a slice or 2 of it, and then they sliced a piece of the bread off and took some of that oleo and put it on it, and put the salt pork between the bread and oleo, and they ate that as a sandwich. And I couldn't believe they eating this uncooked salt pork. Anyway, they ate it, and but they had something to eat and we didn't. Now, they didn't have to share their stuff with us, and they didn't. And we talked about it, and they laughed, and they said, we asked them, well, why aren't you hungry? You're not eating that much. And they laughed, and they said, Americans, they eat, and they eat, and they eat, and they eat too much, and their stomachs is like this. We don't have very much to eat, and our stomachs are small. It shrinks down. It's like this, and that's why we're not hungry. And you know that's true. And anyway, they go to the train would come to a place where they had a chance to go to get the food for us, and they'd go, and one of them would go, and the other two'd stay. And he'd come back, and he'd be looking real sad, and we'd look at him. We say, didn't have anything. We say, what happened? He said, nada. And he was talking to us in Spanish or German, and he said, all this kaput, American bomber, shh, boom, blow up food. And blew up the buildings where the food was kept. And so he couldn't get anything for us with the food stamps he had, and he had no other way to get it. And that happened several times. We didn't get anything to eat. And those guys kept getting hungrier and hungrier. And one of them, well, the Germans or somebody there had some cigarette papers that you make a cigarette out of, and gave them a little bit of tobacco, and they rolled a cigarette, just one cigarette, and they lit it and they passed it around among all 5 of them. Of course, I asked them, I said, what are you going to do with a cigarette? Eat it? And they told me, well, if we have a cigarette, we just wouldn't feel hungry. I said, I don't see how that keeps you from feeling hungry, but I never smoked, so I didn't know. I said, okay. And they also talked those Russians out of giving them some little cigars about 3 or 4 inches long, little twisted black tobacco cigars. And they smoked those. They got one of those. But now they always saved the butts. When it got down to where they couldn't smoke it anymore, they put it in the windowsill and save it. And they let those dry out. And one day they took the butts of those cigarettes and the little butts of the cigars, and they crumbled them up and put them in another cigarette paper, and they rolled them up, and they lit that. And boy, they, whoo-wee, man, I mean, tears come to their eyes. I said, that's strong, isn't it? All the tobacco and all had come down, nicotine, into those butts. Well, we finally ended up in Munich, and early in the morning. And on the way, one time, right after we got on that train, that late in the evening, the night before, they gave us red cabbage soup. And I had to go to the bathroom so bad, and I knew I was going to have the GIs. And I finally got them to understand, I got to go. And I don't know whether I had, whether it was a handkerchief or what, but anyway, they told me, well, just, the train was stopped, and they told me just go down the tracks there and off the side and do it. And so, by golly, I had to. I did. I didn't want to do it in my clothes because I didn't have any other clothes to wear. And then another day, some German SS troopers come up there to the train when it was stopped, and they talked to our guy. They come on the 3 or 4 of them come on that caboose and talked to our guards, and the guards told them no, and they wouldn't do it, and shaking their heads no, and they got mad and left. And we asked the guards what happened, what were they talking about, and the guards told us, well, what they were telling us was for us just to look the other way and let them take us, and we wouldn't have to worry about y'all anymore, because they'd take us over in the woods there, and we wouldn't come back. They wanted to take us out and shoot us, but the guards wouldn't let them. And one of the guards, the oldest guard,